Coming to you live from the Now Media Newsroom.
I'm Jim Tech. You're watching Now Media. With me, John Carpay from the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. Welcome back, John. We've had a few of these meetings or discussions. It's always great to have you on. We're going to talk about a couple things today. We're going to talk about manufacturing consent, that report that you just put out, Government Behavioural Engineering of Canadians, and Bill C-9. Where do you want to start? Bill C-9? Or do you want to start with manufacturing consent?
Manufacturing consent is a report that we put out earlier, just in November, late November, just recently, and it talks about how our tax dollars were used by the Impact and Innovation Unit of the Privy Council office in Ottawa. And the Privy Council office sits at the top of a massive federal bureaucracy. It is the bureaucratic counterpart to the Prime Minister's office. And so our tax dollars were used to have psychologists engage in psychological operations to manufacture consent on the vaccination and testing messages and seeing what was the best way to get Canadians to continue to roll up their sleeves and get injected in 2021 with this new COVID vaccine for which there was no long-term safety data available. And so this report goes through what this unit was doing and why it's an affront to democracy.
They spent almost close to $1 billion on this too?
On the website of the Impact and Innovation Unit, in one of their reports, they say that they are involved in projects worth a total of $725 million, which is almost $725 million. Now, it's not clear to me if that's the actual budget of the Impact and Innovation Unit or if that's the budget of the projects that they were involved with. It's probably the latter, would be my guess. But it's our tax dollars that are being used to manufacture consent on a divisive issue where there's still a live debate going on, and our tax dollars are being used to promote one side of that debate, one message.
Yeah, the COVID era, especially in Canada here, really did not allow for any dissent. And we saw that with people being deplatformed, losing their licenses. You know, some of the doctors that resisted, some of the nurses and that were fired. And basically, they got rid of any type of dissent. And then the messaging was very strong. And the media just towed the line as well and basically become parrots for the government.
Well, this was, and that's a problem when you've got government-funded media, and it's not just the CBC with the $1.4 billion tax dollars that it gets every year, but there's all these other...
155 now.
Oh, good grief. 1.5 billion. I mean, it's disgusting. They're not even journalists. They're an advocacy group for woke, big government, progressive ideology, and... So the media were terrible during the pandemic because they would interview 2, 3, 4 different people, but they were different people who all had the same viewpoint. One would say lockdowns were wonderful and fantastic. The second one would say that government should lock us down a bit harder. And the third one would say that the government should totally violate our rights and freedoms completely. So you got 3 slightly different perspectives, but they wouldn't interview somebody who said that lockdowns are doing more harm than good, that they would not get a hearing. And so whether it was the mandatory vaccines, whether it was ivermectin, whether it was lockdowns, doesn't matter what the issue was, they're promoting one side. What this Impact and Innovation Unit in Ottawa did was test different messages. They came up with the message, the vaccine is safe and effective, so get vaccinated. They came up with that message before the clinical trials had even been concluded. So that's quite sinister and frightening. Then when the vaccine became available to the public and we started to immediately get reports of people dying shortly after getting injected, a few weeks later, people suddenly found dead, died in their sleep, young, healthy people died in their sleep, top-notch athletes died in their sleep, young men getting myocarditis. When these reports emerged, the Impact Innovation Unit tested different messages to see what is the best way to get Canadians to calm down, relax, and not feel anxiety about these adverse reports.
Yeah, and I said that a long time ago. We were marketed to, instead of being informed, we were marketed to, and that's one of the things that the Liberals are really good. The likes of Katie Telford, and that they've won this election through marketing, and they continue to do that. They know that their marketing works, and these message testing and that. I mean, they even deputize the public to go after people. Like we did stories on the truckers rally, and we interviewed people like that. We interviewed doctors and nurses that were fired, and we were sent hate mail and said that we're killing people and all kinds of things. Like we were definitely the inbox was just full of just anger towards us daring to give other people a voice. We had protests on the bridge out here in Kelowna. We interviewed some of the protesters, and we were told, how dare we give them a voice, all kinds of stuff. So there was this deputizing the people, even, right? The way this government was kind of working and telling you to turn in your neighbors, all that kind of stuff was just crazy.
Well, it's an affront to democracy as well when our tax dollars are being used to promote one side of the debate. We had different opinions about lockdowns. We had different opinions about mandatory vaccination policies. This government advertising, I mean, it's one thing, if the government's got posters up saying that, women shouldn't drink alcohol when they're pregnant because it'll damage the baby. I don't know how much good those posters are doing. Hopefully they're doing a lot of good. We don't know. But you've got a pretty strong consensus on that, okay, it's not good for pregnant women to drink alcohol. And so you could have government advertising. I'm not a fan of government advertising to begin with, but if we're going to do it, maybe that's an example of a message that could be legitimate. But here we've got a situation, we've got a brand new vaccine. It has not been, there's no long-term safety data. These COVID vaccines were in clinical trials until 2023. So the clinical trials were still continuing when they were being made mandatory. And then we have our tax dollars being used not to promote informed consent, not to tell Canadians, so we know, well, there's pros and there's cons, there's, informed consent. No. The government advertising, the government's messages are directed at decreasing vaccine hesitancy so that when Canadians are reading reports about young men getting myocarditis and top athletes dropping dead on the field or dying in their sleep, et cetera, people dying shortly after getting injected, so that people just relax and just keep on getting injected. And that's our tax dollars. That is an affront to democracy, to have the government be spending money in one direction in that fashion.
Yeah, I think the biggest failure was media, because media's sole function is really to hold power accountable, and we weren't holding power accountable, the industry in itself, and it was actually just parroting. And then, like you were saying, it raises those ethical concerns of manipulation over persuasion. Like one thing to have a poster, another thing to actually use behavioral science to manipulate the people, and then use the media to parrot that. I don't know how that happened, but the media just fell in lockstep. I mean, independent outlets like ourselves, not so much, but we couldn't even get a question in. That was the other thing. They didn't even give access to the government. Like when we would call in every day to Bonnie Henry, like everybody else. We could not get a question. The only questions they would take is, from Global, CBC, or CTV. Like we could sit there all the time and push the button. We could push the button like crazy. They wouldn't take our question, right?
I'm not surprised at all. No. Well, these media are they're slowly dying a well-deserved death, and it's a beautiful thing to see. And a few weeks ago, I was having coffee with one of the donors to the Justice Center, and he shared with me that his 20-year-old grandson has not even heard about Global News or CBC or CTV, does not listen to them, does not know who they are, because his 20-year-old grandson gets 100% of his information about the world from WhatsApp and X and other social media. And so look, the fact that these people have got to run to the government cap in hand begging for money shows that they're not a viable industry, and they are dying, and there's fewer and fewer people that are listening. And then conversely, you have independent media like yours, Jim, and we've got the Rebel and Juno News and the Western Standard, the Epoch Times. You've got all these independent media that are growing, and so fortunately, the word is getting out. And it's especially amongst the younger demographics, right? Who's watching the CBC? It's old people, and it's the old people who got themselves
dying audience, a shrinking dying audience, right? Because they're literally dying.
Yeah,
because they're,
they were the ones. They were the ones who were the most terrified of COVID, but they were terrified of COVID because they're watching the CBC every hour, and they're allowing themselves to get brainwashed by this repeated fear mongering with a false narrative that made COVID out to be far worse than what it really was, right? But if you tune into this every hour, you're going to be full of fear. But that was the baby boomers. They love the CBC, and they're dying.
We do a 2-hour news show every day, every every weekday morning at 9 o'clock. And one of the things that we do on the show is when we highlight a scandal that's going on, we say, well, let's pull up the CBC and see if it's being covered. The only thing the CBC seems to want to cover is, like press releases from the Prime Minister's office and TDS. They have, it basically should be called the TDS network, because they throw a bunch of anti-Trump stories in there to get their base all fired up and hateful of America. And that's it. Every time there's a major scandal like this Stellantis one that's going on right now, not reading a contract. You're a lawyer, you contracts, right? Who doesn't read a $15 billion contract? You just sign a contract like that? If you put your name on the bottom of a contract, aren't you saying you read that contract?
Mm-hmm. Well, you're suffering the consequences of signing it, whether you read it or not. You can't say afterwards, well, I signed it, but I didn't read it. It doesn't work that way. No.
No financial responsibility for taxpayer dollars. It's just absolutely ludicrous. But yeah, the CBC, we do it almost every day, and we pull it up. None of those stories that are big scandals are being covered there. None of them. And I'm sure you're familiar with Blacklock's too, one of the great organizations here in Canada that highlights. They use a lot of freedom of information stuff. They get a lot of black ink, though, too, right? Because, you know what I mean? Almost everything is redacted these days. And then, like the Stellantis one, they said, it's redacted because Stellantis asked for it. And in committee hearings, Stellantis says, no, we didn't.
Yeah.
And then they just asked, and I'm not sure if you got this yet, they just asked in committee, they say the Liberals now feel threatened because they're getting all these hateful emails from the committee hearings from all the stupid stuff they say, and they say they want to censor the committee hearings now so that the public can't learn about them.
Speaking of committees, the House of Commons Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights is looking at Bill C-9, the Combating Hate Act. And this was very recently, just in the past 2 or 3 days, the Liberals made a deal with the Bloc to get rid of one of the defenses that is available to Canadians who are facing hate speech prosecution. And so this has caused quite a stir. I was really surprised to see it was Canadian Council of Muslim Canadian Council of Public Affairs. I apologize. I forget the name of it, but it was a Muslim group, and on their website, they were denouncing Bill C-9, and the signatories included the United Church of Canada and the Trans Youth Coalition of Windsor, Ontario, and all of these groups that it was a long list of groups that were opposed to Bill C-9. And they've got the Justice Centre is concerned about it as well, because it is going to unleash a large number of prosecutions against Canadians over what they say on Twitter and the internet. And it's a step towards becoming like the United Kingdom, where every day over 30 individuals are charged with hate speech because what they said about immigration policy or something else that's contrary to the government's narrative. And so Bill C-9 is currently, it's before the House of Commons, and now is the time for Canadians who are concerned about protecting free speech to contact their member of parliament about it.
X is now the #1 platform for news in Canada. I mean, I'm surprised it hasn't been for a while. It is a strong platform for news. And the European Union just levied, I think it was a 1.5 million euro fine against X for not censoring people on X. And J.D. Vance just threw no, you're not, at the European Union, said you will not censor American platforms. And J.D. Vance has stood up for freedom of speech many times as soon as he became vice president. And that may be one of the saving graces even in Canada here with some of this stuff that's trying to come down, because there's people actually serving time in England right now for what you just talked about, for, you know, putting Twitter posts up, for putting up a post that, you know, that you would think would be protected under free speech. And then again, I think I interviewed Lisa Bildy recently, and, you know, saying that we get all the kind of culture wars from the United States, but we don't have that absolute protection that they get from the First Amendment rights.
How is JD I'm curious, I mean, I shouldn't be asking you questions, but how is JD Vance going to get the Europeans to back down on this one? Is it 1.5 million or billion?
Yeah, I think it was million. Let me just check it. I'll just pull up his tweet here. But they're going to use, and Trump has also said the same thing to Keir Starmer, that you don't censor American platforms. And they'll threaten him with trade and all kinds of other things with that. And also, you know, the American military is the real message that they have, right? They need the American military, superpower, and they need the weapons from the Americans, right? So there it is. I'm just going to try and find it here. Vance fires warning shot. 1 second here. He tweets a lot too, JD. We had it in our news feed this morning, but I don't know where it is here. Wow, he does a lot.
Well, while you're looking for that, I'll just mention the Bill C-9. So it's called the Combating Hate Act, and one of the worst provisions in it is that it removes the process we have in place right now, whereby if the Attorney General, the Justice Minister, needs to consent in order for a hate speech prosecution to move ahead. So it's not just the local police, local Crown prosecutors that get to decide, but if they want to prosecute somebody for violating the hate speech provisions of the criminal code, they need the permission of the Attorney General. So there's a review process in place. So in Canada, we have seen very few hate speech prosecutions, maybe 1, 2, 3 per decade. It's very rare. What's going to happen if Bill C-9 passes in its current form is that it gets rid of the requirement whereby the Justice Minister needs to approve of a prosecution going ahead. So this gives it into the discretion of the local police, and local police often act in response to complaints. And so this can be become a complaint-driven process. And hate is an emotion. It's next to impossible to define it. We all have a general sense of what it is, but you know, it's very hard for you and I could watch the same YouTube video and you could say that it's hateful, and I could say, no, it's just political opinion. You know, vice versa. We could listen to the same podcast and I could say that's really hateful, and you could listen to it and say, no, it's not hateful at all. It's just an expression of opinion. It's very subjective. And so it's a very dangerous law, because whether people get prosecuted or not depends on if the local police, local Crown prosecutors, and eventually the judge, if they feel that it's hateful, then you know, you're going to get prosecuted and possibly convicted. And so it's a very dangerous law. And what Bill C-9 does is it takes a bad law and it makes it worse.
Yeah, it's very subjective in who's in power. Because, you know, if it was conservatives in power, there'd be different types of hate. And if it was liberals, there's different types of hate. And I just found Marco Rubio, the secretary there, put out the Europeans Commission $140 million fine isn't just an attack on X, it's an attack on American tech platforms and the American people by foreign governments. The days of censoring Americans online are over. And then J.D. Vance was in there too. The EU should be supporting free speech, not attacking American companies over garbage. So
Well, we'll see what happens to.
I remember this.
It's an interesting issue where the intersection of national sovereignty and technology, it's a little bit different, right? 50 years ago, if you were committing a crime of any kind, you would be committing it territorially in a given, without the internet, right? You're committing a crime in a specific country. But now we've got a situation where X is, I assume it's global. So it's an American company, but it's everywhere, you know?
I know that when Elon Musk he's not scared to share his points of view, and then the Europeans threatened to have him arrested. And I think one of the tweets back was, I hope you've bolstered your military. Before you come and try and arrest an American. It's just clownish. And Trump, when he was meeting with Keir Starmer, warned him as well on censoring Americans.
Well, we've got to worry about Canadians getting censored, because if Bill C-9 passes in its current form, the other thing, so the new twist is that, so we have Bill C-9 was introduced in September. So it's bad news for free speech because it removes that requirement whereby the Justice Minister must consent before a prosecution can move ahead. So that's one bad aspect of it. But now it's made worse because there is a provision in there that says that if you are prosecuted for hate speech, one of your defenses is that if in good faith you are expressing an opinion based on a belief in a religious text, and that's never been a free pass on, you know, if you mix the hatred with religion, you could still get convicted. But it's provided a bit of a defense, especially in this era where the LGBTQ narrative is very powerful, very dominant. You can get in big trouble if you oppose it. And so if with this new amendment to get rid of the religious text defense, what's going to happen if Bill C-9 passes in its current form is it's going to open the door for pastors and priests and Orthodox Jewish rabbis and Muslim imams and other religious leaders to get prosecuted for hate speech if they preach and teach what their own religious text says about human sexuality. And most of the world's religions say that sex is only legitimate between a man and a woman who are married to each other, and outside of that context, it's sinful. And so if Bill C-9 passes, it poses a risk of religious leaders getting prosecuted for hate speech if they teach their own scriptures, what their own scriptures have to say about human sexuality.
And where does the Charter of Rights come into play into this? I know when I interviewed Lisa, she said that, you know, we have ours is like a Charter of Rights is different than the First Amendment rights. There's kind of like guide rails, and then they just continue to kind of squeeze on those guidelines there and interpret them differently, where it's not like absolute like in the First Amendment. How do we get to a place where we don't continue to compress Canadian freedom of speech rights?
Well, the Supreme Court of Canada in 1990, there was a ruling. The Keegstra was the name of the case, and it concerned a public school teacher who was promoting anti-Semitism in the classroom, and he was charged with the willful promotion of hatred against Jews. And he challenged the constitutional validity of the hate speech laws as being an unjustified violation of his freedom of expression. And he almost won. It was a 4-3 ruling by the Supreme Court of Canada. They very narrowly upheld the criminal code hate speech prohibitions as justified. And they did so in part because the defenses were available: defense of truth, defense of sincere belief in a religious text, and some other defenses that were available to it. So in short, the hate speech provisions have been ruled to be justified violations of free expression. In terms of the changing legal landscape, I mean, judges, law follows politics, politics follows culture, and culture follows education. So we're in a bad place in Canada because the love for freedom and the idea that government needs to respect our human rights and our constitutional freedoms is missing in the minds and hearts of a lot of people. So we've got a cultural problem, and that does trickle up to the judiciary.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people, through American influence of television, that believe that they have almost like First Amendment rights, whereas it's quite a bit different here in Canada.
The United States, the judiciary, they have been actively having healthy debates and even disputes and conflicts about the appointment of judges. And the Republicans appoint originalists who don't think that the Constitution's a living tree that can just kind of change from decade to decade to accommodate different political preferences. So those are the originalists that are typically, they're appointed by Republican presidents. And then you've got the living tree progressives that are appointed by Democrats. And so they've been having debates about this for decades, which is healthy because really the judiciary is important. In Canada, we haven't even started on appointments, but it's pretty much dominated by woke progressive judges appointed by Trudeau, and before him, Stephen Harper appointed a lot of judges that are not friends of freedom.
Yeah. So, what are the biggest risks? Are this? Some people say there's enough laws already in place to do this, and why do we even need Bill C-9?
Well, if anything, we need to consider getting rid of these hate speech laws because they're always targeted. They're always political. It's always in one direction. The people that get in trouble, it's conservatives, it's social conservatives, it's Christians, it's libertarians, it's people that disagree with the dominant narrative that are getting into trouble. And it's so subjective. I mean, the Bill C-9 tries to define hate by saying that hate is worse than disdain and dislike. So disdain and dislike are not hate, but detestation and vilification are hate. How can you possibly navigate your way through that and actually know if you're breaking the law or not? So I think people should be punished for actual, violence, causing harm to people, property, but to try to control speech in this way, it ends up being political and it gets enforced in one direction only.
Yeah, it's we see an example of that right now in the United States with how political it gets. Where we saw the vice president candidate Tim Walz use words like fascist against Donald Trump, and then Nazi against Elon Musk, and then he used that a lot. And now Donald Trump has called him a retard, and now he's saying that that's hate speech, and how dare he do that, and just says it leads to violence. And I'm just like, you're literally calling somebody a Nazi, which is what motivates somebody to cause violence. When you call somebody a retard, I mean, it's not nice, but it's those type of things don't lead to violence. More as a mocking thing, which you may feel like hatred, but in one breath, he does the stuff that could lead to violence, and in the other one, he wants protection. And I think that's why that political thing, and depending on who's in power at the time, it defines what is hate speech and what is not hate speech, and that's where I see the biggest problems with this.
Well, now's the time to contact members of Parliament because this Bill C-9 is in second reading. Some good news is that the federal government has backed away from Bill C-2, which is the Strong Borders Act, which should be called the Strong Surveillance Act. And this is a horrible, horrible bill with provisions to authorize Canada Post to open letter mail without a warrant, to criminalize the use of cash in amounts greater than $10,000, even for legitimate purpose like a donation to a charity or paying an invoice. Widespread government surveillance without a court-issued warrant. And so a really bad piece of legislation, but there were so many Canadians who contacted their MPs that the federal government has backed down from Bill C-2. They've put it on the back burner. We can achieve the same thing with Bill C-9 if there are enough Canadians who contact their MPs and say, this is a threat to free speech. We don't need it. Laws in place are good enough, but this would be a step towards Canada becoming like the United Kingdom and having thousands of people locked up in jail over their Twitter posts and Instagram posts.
Mark Carney has said it in a few speeches that X is the bastion of hate and misinformation, disinformation. And, I know that several other liberals have said that as well. They don't like X because people, that is the platform for you to go for news. John Rustad, when he resigned on X first, right? He pulled down his leadership thing off X. Kamala Harris declared, conceded the race on X. X is the platform where news happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And it is one place that if you want to suppress information, it is a place to attack, I guess. What do you think? I'll ask you a last question on Stephen Guilbeault. Stephen Guilbeault has now resigned from cabinet there and his heritage minister post, and he was driving some of this legislation. Do you think that switch to Mark Miller will change things, or is it just more of the same?
Mark Miller said recently that he said the Bible is hate speech, that there are passages in the Bible that are hate speech. So that's a pretty clear signal that if Bill C-9 passes, that it's going to cause pastors and priests and rabbis and imams and other religious leaders to think twice before they teach what their scriptures say about human sexuality, which is an affront to freedom. We're all free to disagree. Nobody's required to accept any Islamic, Christian, Jewish teachings, right? But in a free country, religious leaders, if they want to say that what their view is on human sexuality in a free country, you can do that. You should be able to do that without fear of criminal prosecution. So this new minister has said that passages in the Bible are hate speech. And so, this is, even, I would say, even for people that are not going to, a church or other house of worship ever, you got to care about freedom, because in a free country, you should be able to teach and say what you want to say. So, yeah, no, the resignation of Guilbeault doesn't really change the landscape, and it's just as important as ever that people contact their MPs to vote against Bill C-9.
Why do you think we're not seeing a bigger outcry from the churches themselves?
Some of them are naive. They don't understand history. They don't understand that while government can certainly do good things, build some roads and bridges and run a hopefully impartial, unbiased justice system and provide funding for the police and the firefighters. And, there's some core functions that government can do and should do. And that's all well and good. But there is a dark side to government that most people have never learned about in school. For example, the fact that in the 20th century, more people were murdered by their own governments than the number of soldiers who died on the battlefield. If you tally up the tens of millions of people murdered by the likes of Joseph Stalin in the Soviet Union, Mao Zedong in China, the National Socialists controlling Europe during the Second World War, Pol Pot in Cambodia, if you add that up, there's tens of millions of people who've been murdered by their own government, murdered in cold blood, a higher number than soldiers who died on the battlefield. So people don't understand that. So they have this very naive view of government as always good, always wise, always benevolent, always has our best interests at heart. It's like, no. You've got to have a healthy, balanced perspective on government. And so this is the problem with a lot of Christian churches, is this naive notion that government is always a force for good. And so when you've got really bad laws like Bill C-9, they kind of shrug their shoulders and hope for the best. it's stupid. It's naive. It's foolish. It's stupid to not have a healthy, proper recognition of the dual nature of government.
What's the message that people should be sending to their MPs? Just stop Bill C-9.
If you vote in favor of Bill C-9, I'm not going to vote for you, and that's good enough right there. Yeah. And whether your MP is Liberal, Conservative, NDP, Green, Bloc, we saw the government backing down with Bill C-2, putting it on the back burner because of the public outcry. So we need to see the same thing now with Bill C-9.
Yeah, I agree. And then X, I think, when Elon Musk bought X, it changed the whole censorship game in the world. And I thought that was great, and then Facebook changed, YouTube changed. And that's Google and all them, and came around and said, yes, we are forced to be censored. And censorship is not good if you want a healthy democracy.
Well, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. So now in December, as we move towards Christmas, now is the time for good Canadians to contact their MPs and not do nothing.
With that said, Merry Christmas to you and your staff and everybody there, and the good work you do at the Justice Center. And you can go to the Justice Center. It's jccf.ca, I believe. And
Justice Center, Constitutional Freedoms, yeah, JCCF.
And then you can go and you can find all these reports. They're good reports. There's tons of reports on there, and you can read them. And you can probably shoot John an email if you want. And then you can make a donation if you think he's doing good work as well.
Thank you, Jim. Merry Christmas as well to you and your staff and your family. And
enjoy the holiday if we don't speak again, and we'll see you in the new year, but maybe before that, depending on what goes on, right? And
depending on what goes on, yeah.
Until then, thank you for watching Now Media.
Thank you.
We don't just report the news. We live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence.